This is Psych Overflow, coming to you from the University of Southern California's Psychology Department.
We are your go-to podcast for all things psychology.
Welcome, and let's dive in.
All right, we're back with another episode. I got Natalie here and Phil, and my name's Gabe. And today's topic of discussion is, should I pursue a PhD? We can kind of reflect on our own experiences and thoughts on that, and maybe even debate through some of the pros and cons. So I sent you guys that topic idea, and I want to know just like what came to mind when you guys first saw that topic, and what thoughts came to mind.
Yeah, I want to say for me, the first thing that came to mind was just this feeling of I felt like I had done everything that I possibly could do, and I had like hit a ceiling, basically. And that's why I decided I wanted to pursue a PhD, was because I had kind of done everything that I could do so far, but I had additional questions. I had things that I wanted to answer, things that I was interested in. But up until that point, I was really just kind of helping other people ask their questions and answer their questions and carry out their projects and their visions. And I wanted to be able to do that for myself. But the only way I would be able to do that is if I had a PhD. So that was kind of my reason why. And kind of the very first thing that I thought of when I read the topic was, well, why did I decide to do this? That's the reason why, is because I kind of hit a ceiling and wanted to take things a little further.
You were working mostly in like business settings?
No, I was working in research academia, pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
So lab manager for a year, and then after that, a project assistant on various different projects. So kind of helping a lot of people carry out their visions.
Yeah, so it sounds like having the autonomy to go after your own visions and your own research questions, that was what motivated you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good, if there's anybody that's applying that listens in, that's a really good answer. Like, there's questions that you get during interviews that I think that's a really good answer for. Like, I feel like I said something similar in my interviews, where I said something along the lines of kind of like, I feel like up to this point, a lot of my ideas about a particular field that I study or the particular research I do is somebody else's ideas that I'm just kind of carrying out. And I want to have the ability and the autonomy, as you mentioned, to have my own, to form my own ideas and things about these constructs and about these things that I was studying. So I guess that's kind of like in a similar way along the lines of what you were saying of like, yeah, kind of branching out and being able to really form your own opinion and your own perspective and bring your own contributions, and not just kind of like hanging on the back of like whoever your supervisors and mentor is, which I think was important for me.
What makes it, I guess, worth it to you guys? Because it's a huge investment of time, energy. Our income is capped, right? We're typically making the same amount each year on our graduate student stipends. And to stay in research, to stay in academia, like it can be really competitive. So what about that makes the trade-off worth it to you guys? I guess when it comes to the things you want to work on, the questions you want to answer. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. And I think this will also help me answer maybe the first question too. I think I answer both, because there's like really two main things that I thought of. And ironically, those are the two things that I think make it worth it for me to pursue a PhD. One thing is like, I think in a lot of ways, I really do like love what I do. Like, I think my research, like something about it is just interesting to me beyond who it helps, what it does, the importance of it. I enjoy doing a lot of the things I do, like innately. So that's on the one hand, like I didn't really need external motivation. I was like, this is something that I really like. It's fun. It's like being a little investigator and finding out certain things or whatever. And then the second part of that is I get to do something that I think is incredibly fun, but then also have the foresight and like kind of look on the other end and be like, oh my God, this also has like may have implications that actually really help people, whether it be at a large scale or even a more, maybe whether like a theoretical contribution, or like obviously, with your feet on the ground, there's a lot of things we can do with our training as well, whether it be clinical practice, whether it be doing like psychoeducation, things like that. So I think this avenue provides a lot of opportunity to do things that I really love to do, just like selfishly, and also leverage that interest into helping people in a really important way and a really relevant way, I think, to right now.
So for you, it's like the cost isn't as much because you actually enjoy the process of doing the work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I think there's a lot. I mean, obviously, we can talk about things that we don't enjoy. There's
Right.
tons of things about academia that I think would make it not worth it, and that things that I don't like. But at at a rudimentary level, I think the work I do is cool, no matter what anybody else thinks, no matter how much it helps, no matter how much it does. I like doing it,
Mhm.
which I think is incredibly important.
Mm. Yeah. What about you, Natalie? What makes it worth it, despite like what it may cost as well?
Yeah, honestly, I think everything Phil said is exactly it. I love being a scientist and being able to understand things from a lot of different perspectives, really like get under the hood of different, for me, addiction science type ideas and satisfy that craving for curiosity. I love that. So really happy to be able to do that every single day and work with other people who are like-minded, also want to, satisfy that curiosity. And at the same time, I'm making a difference. It feels like I'm making a difference. And I love that as well. That's just always what I've wanted to do, is leave the world a little bit better than I found it, So how can I do that? I'm able to do that with the science that I produce. So yeah, I think it's both of those things together for sure.
Yeah. What if there's a student, or probably many students listening, that can't really think of a good answer to this question, right? Maybe they're contemplating pursuing a PhD and they don't feel the same way like what you guys just articulated, which is I really care about this topic. It sparks my curiosity. I see the potential impact it could make to study this area of research. For students who don't quite feel that, maybe they're an undergrad, maybe they've completed their bachelor's, what would you say? What advice would you give them?
Honestly, take your time, explore a lot of different options. It's not just a PhD, that you can get, right? You can get a master's degree and satisfy a lot of different things that you want, and satisfy a lot of different goals with a master's degree. Sometimes your bachelor's degree is enough. Sometimes it is just like additional certifications that you can get on top of your bachelor's degree. So there are a lot of different avenues and paths, I think. So, take your time and explore in taking your time, explore to really flesh out whether or not it makes sense for you to pursue this. Talk to a lot of different people. That was super helpful for me. People at different areas in their career, like levels in their career, to be able to figure out whether or not it was something that I could see for myself. Yeah. And then just really spend that time self-reflecting with yourself alone after you've explored and you're taking in a lot of other people's perspectives on what their journey was like. Really sit with yourself and ask, do I see myself there?
Was it an aha moment for you, or was it like a slow
It was a slow
burn, I guess?
burn. Yeah, it was a slow
Mm.
burn. I mean, I spent 5 years post grad,
Mm.
like post undergrad,
Yeah.
So I really took my time because I wasn't sure. It was, you see so many people going through the PhD and they're tired, they're broke, they're burned out. They're like, it's a lot,
Mhm.
And I was like, do I really want that for myself? Can I achieve the things that I want in life, not having to put myself through that? The answer was no. Eventually, it came to a head, and it was like, yeah, the answer is no. I want to keep going.
Did you ever, I guess, jump around research topics before you arrived at what you study now, which
Yeah.
seems to be more addiction science? Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that could actually help provide students a little reassurance. I get a lot of students that like, especially high achieving students that I'll talk to that are in undergrad, and they're like, oh my gosh, is this too, like, am I too off base? Am I too unfocused? I'm like, no, dude, you're okay. Like, chill. It's okay to have multiple interests at that stage. But can you speak to your own journey and coming to focus on addiction science?
Yeah. So I think in the beginning, I was working for a research lab at the University of Houston that really focused on getting students to college and getting students through college, specifically kids who are underserved, underrepresented. I started there, which is like somewhere totally different than addiction science, but eventually made my way there by just deciding to join a lab like randomly. I literally cold called that lab and was like, hey, you guys looking for research assistants? I want to expose myself to as many different like areas of research as possible. This is one. It was in the educational realm. Now I'm going to try to do something completely different that I'm still interested in because it was something that has seen a lot of my community and things like that. So I was like, or maybe I can make a difference. Really fell in love with it. But the work that they were doing at that lab was like clinical work, like treatment focused type stuff. And I really enjoyed that, looking at like anxiety sensitivity and how it plays a role in smoking or opioid use or, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually from that jumped into it felt like it was still really small scale. The things that I was doing were really small scale, really only staying within the scientific community. And I was like, well, I want like, what can I do that's like broader reaching? And then I moved to Los Angeles and started working at USC for a gentleman named Adam Leventhal, who was working with the FDA and creating policy for tobacco products and things like that. And that felt wider reaching. So it was kind of like, I don't know, I kind of bounced around a lot, but as long as you're having fun and you're, figuring out different things about yourself, things that you're interested in, what you're seeing, what you like, what you don't like, and pivoting, and that's informing the next step, you're gonna be solid, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice, great perspective. And Phil, what's your perspective on that? Like students who feel like they don't know exactly which path they want to take their academic journey. What words would you share with them?
Yeah, I agree completely of everything you were saying, Natalie. But I guess my path was probably slightly a little different. But even before I get into that, I think I want to go back and kind of notice, and I know you didn't give an answer, but I imagine this is the same for you, the common thread of people that do a PhD in psychology, but I'll even emphasize clinical science because I think there's some ambiguity in the undergrad population about what a clinical psychology degree looks like, is it would be really hard to do it without really having a love for research. Like that is a lot of your time.
Yeah.
And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe for a lot of people that are considering a PhD in clinical psychology specifically, I think if you go into a psychology field outside of clinical, you probably have a good understanding that you're going to be you're going to be doing an experimental psychology. But in clinical psychology, I think that it's important to really weigh out like how much you like research, because that is really a ton of your time. And I think there's a misconception maybe among some students that think that like, oh, maybe they can get around that, and you can't. So that's one thing I'll say, just going back. But then fasting forward in terms of my path, I definitely think it's totally cool to bounce around. And I think it's actually really a good narrative to show that you've done a lot of things and have a lot of experiences. For me, at least my research interest path was somewhat probably a bit more linear, because I started kind of doing more stress work in animals in undergrad, then moved to basically doing all fear and anxiety neuroscience labs up until I got to USC. And that's where I've actually done the most pivoting, is getting to USC, working with Darby Saxby, and where I'm working kind of in a special population of first-time fathers, but still kind of holding on to some of the interests I had before.
So even taking a step from working at the NIH, right, and then going to grad school, even that was a pivot. So like your research interest shifted a little bit there.
So I think, and I guess the takeaway is I was able to kind of hold the thread of my interest, or the fabric of my interest, but kind of pivot slightly in each step. But yeah, there was, I think, between working at NIH in that group and then going to Darby Saxby's group, I was pivoting population for sure. I was doing fear in kids before. Now I'm doing a still effective neuroscience, but in dads. So, but being able to kind of narrate that, like when you do your personal statement and we start doing interviews and stuff, I think is incredibly important. Like it's okay to have these different experiences, but I think for me, it was like the common fabric that I was able to hold on to as I moved through some of these different experiences that I think was really helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have similar answers to both of y'all in regards to why I'm here and why I'm doing it. It's that passion, right? It's like, I think we all have a reason why that drives us to be curious and to do good science and to see that our science translates into something of impact in the world, right? But I think that's not a coincidence, right? I think our program selected on that probably in admitting us. So I do want to also normalize, though, that we didn't all just arrive here overnight, right? And I think all of our stories point to that. Like, I can remember, I was at a non-research university as an undergrad in Arizona, Grand Canyon University, and really didn't know what I was doing career-wise, like was still trying to piece things together, had some exposure to research through a mentor that I had gotten connected with. But to say that if you had told that version of myself that I would be here, a third year PhD student at USC, I would have been baffled, right? And it was a completely nonlinear process to get here. And I think for me, it was the right choice. I ended up doing a master's degree in counseling at Arizona State, got a lot of clinical experience working with teenagers and families. I really liked that, but I was also really passionate about the research. I got to volunteer while I was there. And for me, it clicked, but I also want to speak to the fact that it may not click for everyone and people may not find it interesting. They may not arrive at that strong reason why. And that's also totally okay. I think there's many great reasons not to do a PhD. And that's kind of where I wanted to pivot the conversation now. Because you brought up a good point, Phil, like with the whole clinical psychology thing, there could be some misconceptions about what is expected of students in programs like this, right? That to me, our program here at USC, it's research first, right? That's what I gather the way that they structure things.
As I would say, are most, at least in terms of the heavy R1 institute.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So R1 meaning like they're the biggest research schools in the country. And yeah, so students getting into those PhD programs are going to be expected to have a desire to do research, right? And train as a researcher. But I don't think that's actually the case for all PhD programs in clinical psych. I would say that probably at R2 schools, so schools that are less research focused, there's probably less of a demand for research productivity from grad students. And also, and I have a whole spiel of what I would share with students interested in clinical or counseling psychology, which I'm sure we could do in another episode, but just also a plug for other degrees like a counseling psychology PhD, which is far less research focused, far more clinically focused. Natalie, you brought up master's degrees. I think if someone just wants to be a clinician and work with people, master's degrees are usually the way to go to get there. Yeah, so I'll turn the conversation now to the question I alluded to, which is what are some bad reasons to do a PhD, right? Or stated differently, what are some reasons not to do a PhD? Because I think that can also be really helpful in giving students some perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say as a young woman, sometimes if you want a family,
Mm.
taking that 5 year, if you're not doing like undergrad and then going, or in like maybe 2 years and then you're going straight to the PhD, like by the time you're done, you might be a little older than you want to be. And so I've literally had conversations with people where they were like, before I did the PhD, and they're like, you got to consider that as well. Like if you want that family, what is that going to look like for you when you're done with your PhD? How busy you're going to be, things like that. So that's one thing. The money aspect for sure is another thing. Capping my salary for 5 years, 6 years, that's rough,
Mhm.
and then you do a postdoc as well, even longer, so, I mean, that's rough because it delays a lot of your plans. Like if you want, again, the family, you want to buy, a home or some sort of economic stability, financial stability for your life, that can be a little bit of a challenge. And then if you hate research, if you hate writing, publications, things like that, that can also be a reason why you might not want to do it.
Great perspective. I'm glad that you went right to how it affects personal life, right? It intersects with personal life because that I think doesn't get talked about. So I'm really glad you brought up that, like delaying starting a family, forcing you to move,
Yep.
relocate, right? Not only for the PhD program, but for postdocs, for jobs.
Your partner might have to be doing that too. If you have a partner and now you're asking them to make that long haul with you as well.
I know, exactly. Yeah, so all of those things I think speak to how much the sacrifice is, you know what I mean, to do the academic route, do a PhD. For everyone, maybe that's not the case, right? Maybe you luck out and you get to do PhD locally or you don't have to move. But for the most of us, it does force you to be transient and forces you to put some personal goals on the back burner. Phil, what about you? What would you share?
Yeah, I also really like that because I honestly heard the question differently, but I like the fact you brought up like basically convincing there's a lot of good reasons not to do a PhD. I guess how I took the question, so this maybe give a different perspective, is what are like the wrong reasons to do a PhD? And kind of one of the things that Gabe mentioned, and again, it might sound unintuitive for kind of people early in the academic pipeline, and this is also specific to clinical psychology, but if you want to be a clinician, a PhD in clinical psychology is tough. And there's probably, like you mentioned, better options.
By clinician, you mean like working with people?
Sorry, yeah. If you want to be doing like day-to-day clinical work, working with people, giving therapy, there are really, really strong options that are going to be less time-consuming, that are going to be more focused and tailored to your interest in terms of being a clinician. And that may be worth even going through some of those distinctions, but I'll just say that as the first thing. I think the other thing that I find is, I think people that have incredibly linear paths, and like, I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh, well, a PhD is kind of just the next thing. Not the right reason, I would say, because then it just becomes hard. I think it's hard to treat a PhD passively. It has to be kind of like a persistent, or I guess, at least I think, for it to kind of work out well and for you to maintain your mental health, there has to be some persistent underlying desire to kind of integrate that research aspect and those other aspects that come with the PhD. And if there's not that underlying passion for it, just saying like, oh, this is the next step in my academic journey, and I just did my master's, and like I kind of want to have a doctor in front of my name, like those things, there are probably much easier ways to do it than doing a research PhD. So in any psychology field, really.
Yeah, I think you hit on everything that I was going to bring up, right? Don't do it for the prestige. Don't do it because it's just the next thing. Do not do it for the money, for sure.
I didn't mention that, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
good.
Don't do it unless you have a genuine interest in research. And to be more specific, it's like using, I'm going to speak to psychology specifically, using science to answer questions about people, right? About humans, about behavior, about maybe mental health, or something, some question. If you're not interested in learning how to use the tools of science to answer those questions, that includes thinking of research designs, applying for grants, running studies, gathering data, analyzing that data, and then writing about it in a scholarly way. If that process doesn't seem interesting or useful, then I think that's a signal that a PhD program is probably going to be more arduous and a pain in the butt, right, than it would otherwise. You know what I mean? Because it's hard enough already, because you're having to learn all these skills kind of simultaneously as you go along the process. And it takes a lot of initiative, and, you got to be kind of self-motivated. So to not enjoy it on top of it being hard, like that's not conducive to I think a good experience in pursuing a PhD. So those would be the only things I add. But yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. And it's also okay to not pursue. It's okay to not want to pursue a PhD, to have it not be a good fit. I think it's actually better to try and convince students all these reasons not to do a PhD. And then if someone hears all those and they stick around and say, no, that's for me, then at least you know that it's probably a good place for them, right?
Yeah. The one thing I just thought about, and this probably could be a whole other episode, but if we want to get into it briefly now, that's fine. But a lot of the things that we're talking about are just, like, let's say you're a great candidate, let's say you get into PhD programs. A lot of the things we're talking about are going to be influenced by if you have a decision to make, which PhD program you choose. Like, I think, so like, let's say we talked about location, we talked about financial, we talked about fit and research interest. All these things I think are pretty variable across programs. So I think it's really important, Like, even if you do decide that a PhD is what you want to do, also think about these things where you're thinking about choosing a mentor and thinking about choosing the program you want to go to as well. Because I think those same questions kind of come up. At least I think they did when I was going through the process.
So like weighing your personal goals, concerns with the type of place that you wanted to be for your
Like,
PhD.
some PhDs are obviously in small towns. Some PhDs, like, I was prioritizing a big city.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that when I applied and when I was making a decision, I knew a big city was something I was looking for. It's a personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that, there's some PhD programs, no shade, that are giving less than $25,000 a year.
Right. Yeah.
And there are some that are giving like $45,000 a year, or even more. Like, and obviously it depends on the city. But
Mm-hmm.
and then obviously there's mentor, like, who your mentor is gonna be incredibly influential on how your time is at that program. Do you want somebody that's more on you and meeting with you every couple of days and checking your R script to make sure you didn't do anything wrong? Or do you want somebody that's more laid back and kind of just more playing quarterback and letting you kind of do your thing? I think all those things, are important when deciding. So
Yeah, I think you reminded me of one of the things I wanted to say, which is a bad reason to do a PhD is because you don't want to let someone down, right? Whether it's a PI, whether it's one of your old mentors.
That's a good point.
That's a bad reason. And it's especially important because you made me think of this, Phil. Like, once you apply to PhD programs, let's say you're a strong applicant, you start getting offers, like, those professors are highly incentivized to get you to go there, right? Because they want you as their student. They've selected you, they give you an offer. And so mentoring students through this process, I always try to tell them, this is your choice, right? This is your life. They'll get a student eventually, right? And it's important that you do put your priorities first, right, in this journey. So I'm all about students making decisions that are right for their personal life, their loved ones, their families. And that choice may be a hard one, but yeah, it's important, I think, to support students in that situation because it can feel very vulnerable when you're going along that process and having to make these tough decisions. And one day when I'm a professor, I may empathize with their position too. I know they have a bunch of pressure and, there's a lot of demands on them to make sure that they admit students that are strong and can get going right away. But yeah, I'm just very usually pro-student in these kind of conversations. You know what I mean? Make the choice that's right for you, whether it's going to a specific program, whether it's going to no program at all and doing something else. I think that's the best advice I can give to students who are interested. But any other thoughts, guys, before we close?
I think so.
No, I thought that was good.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
This is Psych Overflow signing off. Thank you for listening.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast for future episodes, and don't hesitate to reach out to us with your feedback, questions, or topic suggestions.
See you next time.